Coach's Corner podcast, brought to you by CodyWork18.com. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the New Year's edition of the Coach's Corner podcast. This is the final episode of 2015 of the show, and heading into 2016, I'm looking to add on to the Coach's Corner podcast. Yes, I'm looking for a co-host to help join me every single week to talk about the latest news and updates going on in the NFL and around the world of sports. So if you're absolutely interested, if you're that passionate sports guy who needs a platform to have his voice heard, please reach out to me on Twitter at CodyWork18 or at Coach's Co Podcast, or go to my website, CodyWork18.com, click the contact part, and then send me an email telling me why you want to join the Coach's Corner podcast, and then kind of list some of your sports knowledge and experience and just on teams, conferences, whatever it may be, your knowledge of sports, how it may make the show even better. Send that, and then I want to start conducting interviews to have a co-host going forward in 2016. Got a couple of people in mind already, so if you are an interested party, please let me know, because the train's going to start taking off very soon. So exciting news for the 2016 year for the Coach's Corner podcast. We're going to have a lot of great things, a lot of new upgrades, so very, very excited about that. Today we're going to talk about the AFC, the American Football Conference, in the NFL. We'll talk about the NFC next week. However, the AFC playoff race is shaping up to be a very interesting one. Obviously, right now, the current standings are the New England Patriots sitting at the 1 seed with a 12-3 record. Denver sitting at a number 2 seed with an 11-4 record. They hold the tiebreaker over New England. So if Denver wins this Sunday and Miami beats the New England Patriots as well this Sunday, the Denver Broncos secure the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs, home field advantage, and a first-round bye. That'll be very helpful for the Denver Broncos going forward with, as many injuries as they have. So Denver has to win against San Diego this weekend, and Miami has to beat New England in Miami this week in order to make that happen. Cincinnati Bengals sitting at the 3 seed with an 11-4 record, losing to Denver Broncos on Monday Night Football. With that win, the Denver Broncos secured a playoff spot in the AFC playoffs. Houston has not yet clinched a playoff berth. They're still sitting there. They have a game ahead of the Indianapolis Colts, and that's going to really shape out to be a very interesting battle. The Colts, in order to get into the playoffs, they have to win, and they have to have about 5 or 6 other teams win or lose in order for them to make it in. So the chances of the Colts being in the playoffs this year is slim to none. They're already done on quarterbacks. Andrew Luck is hurt. Charlie Whitehurst is hurt. Matthew Hasselbeck is hurt. They're on their 4th-string quarterback. They just signed Josh Freeman this week. And that's just telling you how bad it's going there for the quarterback in Indianapolis. Chuck Pagano is likely going to be fired. It's pretty crazy. And then so the wild card, Kansas City's already secured a playoff spot, a wild card spot, at a 10-5 record. And then the Jets also are sitting in the wild card spot as the 6th seed right now with a 10-5 record. In the hunt is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who really control their own destiny. They could have got a playoff spot this past weekend. However, they lost to Baltimore, in a divisional game down there. So for the New York Jets this week, they have to win. If they win, they are in. So they take on a really tough team, a tough defense in the Buffalo Bills this upcoming week. So for the New York Jets, if you win, you're in, and the playoffs will be that. And more than likely, we will see the Patriots, the Broncos, the Bengals, the Texans, the Chiefs, and the Jets in the playoffs. And right now, I think out of all those teams, I think the team that nobody wants to play would be the New York Jets. They're playing really good football right now under Todd Bowles. Ryan Fitzpatrick has found the fountain of youth in that beard of his. Brandon Marshall's playing at a really elite level, Pro Bowl level. He just got selected to a Pro Bowl this year. And this would be the first time in his career that he would make the playoffs in his years being in the league, if they, in fact, do win this Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. And then Kansas City, obviously, playing pretty well football down the stretch. A lot of people are saying they're legitimate Super Bowl contenders. However, I tend to disagree, and it's not because I'm a Broncos fan or I analyze the AFC West. I really do believe that you look at the schedule of the Kansas City Chiefs since the bye week, they've played a really easy schedule, in their one game, obviously, that they won. They came into Denver and beat the Denver Broncos when Peyton Manning was hurt, threw so many interceptions. The Broncos got put in the 4th quarter. Obviously looking at Denver missing some pieces, not to make excuses. Kansas City won. They played a better game that game. However, I think the final stretch of the season for the Kansas City Chiefs has been very inferior. They barely held off the Cleveland Browns comeback attempt last week. Johnny Manziel, unfortunately, because of coaching and time management by the coaching staff of the Cleveland Browns, Johnny Manziel drove them down the field with the chance to win the game. No timeouts left, however, after a pass was caught. Johnny Manziel went to go either spike the football or to get one final playoff and ran out of time because there just wasn't enough time left, and the Kansas City Chiefs held on. I do think the Chiefs will be I think they will be one and done in the playoffs. It's going to be an interesting playoff picture. I'm not totally sure how it's going to, shape out yet. Obviously, New England plays the Miami Dolphins, who've been playing very inferior football lately. They got to go on the road. They got to play down there in Miami where it's hot, where Miami tends to sometimes play the Patriots really well down there. We'll see how that goes, but the Patriots coming off a loss to the Jets. The Jets always play the Patriots tough, and it was an impressive win. A lot of people in the sports media world, and I've had a couple debates on Twitter about this, have been saying that the New England Patriots lost to the Jets on purpose because they wanted to avoid playing the Steelers in the playoffs, which I tend to find really asinine. And the reason I say that is I don't think in the game of professional football, professional sports, a team wants to intentionally lose in order to avoid playing a team. Plain and simple. The New England Patriots have talent. When fully healthy. Obviously, I think for the playoffs, they'll have Edelman, Amendola back as well. So Brady will have those guys back. Obviously, you have Gronkowski back, who was kind of, obviously went down in the Denver game, and a lot of question based on that time during that game was the fact that they were, the fear was that he really hurt his knee. He would be out for the rest of the year. He's fine. He's back, and he's playing really well. Rob Gronkowski, however, didn't have as big of a game against the New York Jets as he's had lately. He got confused on a route. Him and Tom Brady were off the page, and Darrelle Revis had an interception. But I really do think that Rob Gronkowski is the best versatile player in the NFL at his position. He's so unstoppable. He's hard to cover. And you just go to see when Tom Brady in New England faced a 4th and 9, he hit Gronkowski up the seam for about a 19-yard game, and he got hit by 2 guys while catching it. So, this guy's the real deal. He's very tough. New England's going to be tough to play in the playoffs, which is why Denver is very hopeful that Miami can somehow knock off the Patriots this weekend in Miami. Denver wins. They can secure the number 1 seed, and the playoffs will have to come through Mile High. If the Patriots continue to win, advance, and Denver wins their divisional game, then obviously the Patriots would have to come back to Denver, but it's going to be a tough road. If New England does hold on and keeps the number 1 seed, it's going to be a very tough road to come through the playoffs and then come and win it in Foxborough, Massachusetts, in one of the coldest times of the year, where the Patriots tend to play really well at home, especially in that home stretch of the playoffs. So, history hasn't been on Denver's side or any other team's side except the Baltimore Ravens going into Foxborough and taking on the Patriots and winning in that time of the year, the most crucial time of the year for that. The Bengals right now in question really where they could end up. Obviously, if the Bengals would have won on Monday Night Football against the Denver Broncos this past Monday, they would have locked up the number 2 spot. They would have had a week off, a bye in order to try to get Andy Dalton back and healthy. His question is really unknown until he gets his cast off, which should be next week. They said if he gets his cast off, they'll be able to determine when he can come back. If he's not able to come back this week or even in the playoffs at all, they got A.J. McCarron, who, in my eyes, I look at how A.J. McCarron played against the Denver Broncos' top-ranked defense in the NFL, and I'm pretty impressed with this kid. I think Hugh Jackson has a tremendous system down there in Cincinnati where it's really just quick hitting. It's to where A.J. McCarron doesn't really have to think too much. He's just got to trust his read. He's got to get his pre-snap read, and he's got to throw, and his receiver's going to be there. However, I think, Cincinnati is really dangerous. They do a lot of deep comeback routes, which we saw against Denver, and they were very effective routes. In the first half, A.J. McCarron looked unstoppable. The Cincinnati Bengals were rolling. Obviously, open and drive, A.J. McCarron, threw a touchdown to A.J. Green over Aqib Talib, but it was a great coverage, great position. He just, A.J. Green made a great play. Cincinnati went up 7-0. Denver couldn't get anything going at first, and then Cincinnati got the ball back. Mohamed Sanu took the wildcat snap to the edge, to the outside, scored the touchdown, and it was 14-0 Cincinnati on top, and it looked like Denver was potentially out of it. By the way that they were playing, Denver could not get off the field on 3rd down. Their defense couldn't stop them in the first half. half. They went with a lot of man coverage, and A.J. McCarron had time with his quick releases. Hugh Jackson's game plan kept Denver's defense on their heels most of the first half because of his approach and their ability to run the ball, hit checkdowns out of the backfield to Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill. It really proved to be effective for the Cincinnati Bengals in the first half, and Denver looked like they were in trouble until they started getting things going. And towards the end of the second quarter, almost by halftime, Denver started to get things going a little bit on offense. Brock Osweiler hit Emmanuel Sanders on a deep throw. It was a risky throw, but made the conversion. Obviously didn't get the 7 points that they wanted. However, they did settle for a field goal, and they got it. And then in the second half, in the third quarter, Brock Osweiler hit Emmanuel Sanders for a touchdown pass, and then C.J. Anderson broke off a 39-yard touchdown run that put Denver up 17-14, and then Nugent came in, he hit a field goal, tied the game up at 17, we went to overtime. In overtime, Denver got the ball first, drove down the field. Brock Osweiler looked really good in the fourth quarter, leading the team down the field. Obviously, Brandon McManus shanked it with no time left on the clock. One of the worst kicks I've ever seen in my life. However, he missed it. Denver gets the ball in overtime. Brock Osweiler drives down the field, does really, really well, makes some smart throws, and Brandon McManus redeems himself, hits a 37-yard field goal to give the Denver Broncos a 20-17 lead. So now Cincinnati gets an opportunity to get the ball to try to score a touchdown or to kick a field goal to tie it to extend overtime. And on a play, A.J. McCarron dropped back and he went to go throw, and it looked like Von Miller hit the ball out of his hand. What was essentially should have been a sack fumble, and even a former referee in the NFL, I forgot his name, he got on the microphone on ESPN Monday Night Football with John Gruden, Mike Tirico during the call, and said that based on it, there should have been a review, and it should be called a fumble based on the rule. So Ed Hock and the crew, after Gary Kubiak pleaded that they look at it and review it, came out saying it was not a fumble, which to the dismay of John Gruden, Mike Tirico, myself, and many other people, that was a fumble. Social media knew it was a fumble as well, as going nuts. And then really they had another chance. So I think the football gods at that point said, you know what, refs, you got the call wrong. So the next snap, the very next snap, the snap goes through A.J. McCarron's hands. He drops the ball. It's a fumble, live ball to Marcus Ware, comes off the edge, secures it, injures A.J. McCarron's left wrist at the same exact time, ends the game 20-17. Denver Broncos win in overtime, secure a playoff spot and sit at the number 2 seed at the current moment. And it was an incredible game. Denver's defense adjusted really well in the second half. Wade Phillips decided to pressure a little more. He'd squeeze the edges with DeMarcus Ware, Von Miller, and he'd force coverage to where Denver's DBs could disguise a little bit, and they could play it to where they had to force A.J. McCarron to throw throws to the outside where the DBs were ready. All they had to do was make a tackle, and they were much, much better in the second half. Great adjustment, and it was something that Denver really, really needed. And I was very, very impressed with Brock Osweiler's poise, especially going in the final stretches of the fourth quarter, potential game-winning drive. He got us down there. Brandon McManus didn't make the field goal. He made some really impressive throws, including a really tight throw into a window of 3. Vontaze Burfict was sitting underneath. You had the corner trailing over the top, and you had the safety coming across, and he fired it into the window to Owen Daniels, who got more yards after the catch, made a great play, and then Denver from then on got into field goal range. Obviously he missed it. And from that point forward, it was all about going to overtime and getting down there, scoring, kicking a field goal, and for the defense to hold on, which they did that. Obviously banged up a little bit. Brandon Marshall kind of hurt a little bit with a mid-ankle sprain. TJ Ward re-aggravated his ankle injury a little bit. They said it's a minor setback. He should be okay, should be ready to go. So, however, if you look at it this way, if Denver Broncos win on Sunday against the Chargers, the Miami Dolphins beat the Patriots, the Denver Broncos get the 1 seed, a first-round bye and home field advantage, which would be very, very beneficial to the health of the Denver Broncos going forward. They could get some guys back from injury, and they can have a solid game plan set for the playoffs. They could be ready. They could be re-energized, refocused. It'll be a great thing for the Denver Broncos, essentially. So, the Houston Texans continue to, have a pretty solid close to the season. Obviously Brian Hoyer will be back next week. But I think the Houston Texans, they're I don't know how to describe them. I don't think they're good. I think pretenders. Obviously, the division that they're in the AFC South is very, very average and lackluster this year. You've got the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, you've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's it's a really, really weak division. And the Tennessee Titans, who the Houston Texans absolutely demolished, they look terrible. Marcus Mariota's hurt, and then there's potential rumors after Chip Kelly got fired that he could actually be joining Tennessee Titans by next week. We could see, but I do predict that to be an offseason move. We'll talk about that with former Denver Broncos safety Nick Ferguson here a little bit later on in the show. Interesting take. We're going to get his thoughts on the AFC playoff picture and some of the games, get his thoughts and analysis on the Bengals and Broncos Monday Night Football game. We're going to talk about that and much more when we come back on the Coach's Corner podcast. Welcome back to the Coach's Corner podcast. Right now, I'm going to be joined by former Denver Broncos safety Nick Ferguson. He was on the show previously this year, and he's got a lot of great on the NFL and his experience in the pros. So we're going to talk about the concussion movie. We're going to talk about the Broncos, the Bengals, and we're going to talk a lot of just the current NFL topics in general. Here we go. Podcast. I'm joined right now by former Denver Broncos safety Nick Ferguson, who's been on the show before, and quite frankly, that was our most popular episode. A lot of fans really appreciated his insight behind the scenes of the NFL, especially with his letter to undrafted free agents and a little bit of perspective from him on his coaching internship that he had with the Denver Broncos this summer. Fans really enjoyed it, Nick. You got a lot of great feedback from it, and people were really, glad to hear your insight on it. And a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, I remember Nick Ferguson." I was like, "Yeah, he's been out of the league for a little bit. He's covering games now, and it's really great." So, first and foremost, before we get this started, I just want to say I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and I hope it was a great one spent with your family. Obviously we had some football games. Obviously Christmas Eve we were graced to see. I don't know if we could say grace by that means, to see Oakland Raiders and the San Diego Chargers go into an overtime game in which we thought a game that would never ever end. That was a pretty crazy game.
Well, you know what, that game, going back to that San Diego-Oakland game, that was a fun game to watch because it was one of those games where both organizations find themselves facing a situation now, whether they're going to stay in Oakland, whether they're going to stay in San Diego. And right now it appears as though both teams might be on the move. With nothing has been set in stone just yet, but to see the fans come out and, the fact that it went to the overtime. I joked about it on social media about the guys from Buffalo Wild Wings continuing to keep the game going because you got Phillip Rivers, and his story, history. And also you had on the opposite side of the ball, you had Charles Woodson, who was calling it quits after 18 years in the NFL. So to see that game extended out, it was great. It was long. Some people didn't like it, but with the storylines being what they were coming into the game, I thought it was a fascinating game in a way to possibly end what could be both teams leaving their respective places, now making the jump to Los Angeles.
Yeah, most certainly. And normally when you look at a game on primetime television that's coded between two of the AFC West bottom teams, with San Diego and Oakland, you kind of look at both teams. Obviously, San Diego's had a year they wish they could relive all over again, that they could go back and have another tryout, but they've been just battered with injuries. They've had, I think they've had the worst luck in the NFL on the offensive line, on the side of the ball with injuries. It's been crazy. You can't compete in the National Football League against, these top talented, defensive ends, linebackers with third, fourth string offensive linemen. I think they've got 4 or 5 offensive linemen that they've had from the beginning of the season on injured reserve. It's just sad to see, but, as you mentioned, the storyline between obviously Phillip Rivers, who's done so many great things for the San Diego Chargers. For me, I always despised playing against Phillip Rivers, watching him play against the Denver Broncos because, we look back to the years when Jay Cutler was the quarterback for the Broncos and San Diego was at the top of the AFC West every single year. It was kind of frustrating because he was so good. And as much as we like to pick on Phillip Rivers and say we don't like him, he's a competitor. He's a great guy. Obviously, I've seen a few documentaries, and, you look at guys like Von Miller, as we saw in the last game with them and the San Diego Chargers, that, they got a little chippy between the two, but after the game, it was all hugs. I think that's the nature of this game. But, as you said, the storyline, is it the last time we see these two teams playing in their respective stadiums in Oakland or in San Diego? It's kind of crazy to see. I kind of wonder what the impact would be if you take two NFL teams out of a city. I can understand if you take one out, but if you take two teams, if you take a team out of Oakland, you take a team out of San Diego, you put them in LA, does that impact the revenue at all of these franchises or the NFL?
I think that it does, and here's what I'm worried about. It's great just kind of thinking about the idea of bringing a team to Los Angeles. There have been teams here before. The Rams have been here. The Raiders have been here, and we've gone on to where they are residing right now in this present time. But the one thing you have to know about the Los Angeles area, and I stay true to this, the fans in Los Angeles, they love a winner. Even you look at the fact that the Lakers are not doing that well. And when you live in a city where there are now more whispers and conversations about the Clippers than there are, about the Raiders, about the Los Angeles Lakers, that tells you that the signs are changing somewhat. But the Lakers are not doing that well. Fans are still going out there, even though, Kobe Bryant has announced that this is his farewell tour. And even before that, fans still showed up because it was still Los Angeles, still the Lakers. So that tells you the level of loyalty that the fans have, but that's loyalty to teams that win games. And that's the only thing that concerns me. You bring the Oakland Raiders here. You bring the San Diego Chargers. You bring the Rams. If you bring those teams here to Los Angeles, we don't care what they did previously. We wanted to see what those teams are going to do now. If you're not putting a winning product, on the field, fans are going to tune out. There's so many things to do in Los Angeles, and they're not as loyal to the game of football as some fans will have you, or some people will have you to believe. So whether it's the Rams, whether it's the San Diego Chargers, or whether it's the Oakland Raiders, you got to come here and you have to win. If you don't, fans are going to tune you out, and it's going to be kind of a short-lived experiment. And I know the league wants to move overseas. They want that British fan. They want those UK dollars. But to me, I think you start at home first. The idea may work in Los Angeles, but the product has to be productive, and they have to win. And which makes me think of another situation, because today it was some whispers. I don't know if it come to fruition or not, but the fact that the St. Louis Rams might be interested in Drew Brees. Now, I know Drew Brees has a heavy price tag for the New Orleans Saints that, they may have to restructure a deal or whatever. But to me, I think it's great if Jeff Fisher, they make that jump from St. Louis to Los Angeles, and you bring a guy back like Drew Brees, and you have Case Keenum to back him up. I think that's great, because now those San Diego Chargers fans that love Drew Brees, they can now drive down to Los Angeles and take that hour, 45-minute drive, see a guy who still has something left in the tank, and then you put that with, Tavon Austin, Kenny Britt, and Todd Gurley and Trey Mason, and then that defense they had. Now you're talking about a team that can win some football games, and people will come out in droves for something like that.
Wow, you just created a very, very beautiful blueprint in the eyes of me. I think you could be a great marketer, too. If you were going to pitch the opportunity for the St. Louis Rams to go to LA, I think you got it. With that, you make a very appealing point. Obviously, you played against Drew Brees when he was the San Diego Charger, essentially. He still got it. He's still playing really well, and we saw that this past weekend when he just torched the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Even with a torn plantar fascia, he still got it. I think you put a marketable franchise name like Drew Brees combined with a team like the St. Louis Rams, if they do in fact are the team that decides to move forward to be put into LA, I think you make it a little more appealing for those, for those fans, as you said. But, when you look at it this way with the Oakland Raiders as well, you look at Oakland, they have a very big fan base. They have a very big fan base, especially in Oakland. We saw a couple weeks ago when, even when Denver traveled to San Diego and Denver traveled to Oakland, there was a huge presence of orange in those crowds. So I don't know if it was,
yes,
if all the fans just gathered in Oakland because it was Charles Woodson's last game for them at the Coliseum. That could be a very big factor. To me, I actually kind of space this, at the time of that that game based on how the game ended when the Raiders won, and he got on the microphone, talked to the crowd. I actually thought that was his last game ever, and I forgot the fact that they have one more game left this weekend against the Kansas City Chiefs, a very big divisional game as well. And you know, I kind of look at it as I'm kind of rooting for Oakland this week if I'm a Denver Broncos fan. You know, with it, Denver, if they lose and Kansas City wins, Denver still is kind of at risk for losing the AFC West. So there's a lot riding onto this week. And even though it's week 17, guys are injured, you know, playoff runs are being ready to be made. You know, it's going to be an exciting weekend. So with the Oakland Raiders, with the Kansas City Chiefs, who do you think is going to win this game, you know, this upcoming week in Kansas City?
Well, you know, Kansas City has become, and has always been, a tough place to play the game of football. And now they find themselves playing in a meaningful game. A game where you win a game, there's a potential with the Denver loss, like you said, you now win the AFC West. And when you talk about preseason goals, that's always there. Before you even have an opportunity to compete for a Super Bowl, it's always win a division. Because if you don't win a division, then you can't get there. So they're right there on the cusp. And what I find really fascinating, and I have to say, you know, I was just like everyone else. I call a spade because at the time that's what I saw. And what I'm referring to is Alex Smith. I mean, he was known ever since he was in San Francisco as being a game manager, not really being able to throw the ball down the field or not being trusted to throw the ball down the field in the vertical passing game. And we all know the stats where he didn't throw to a receiver and the receiver didn't have a touchdown pass last year and then coming into the early part of the season. One thing that they started doing, and it was kind of a surprise to me, he started throwing the ball down the field. Now, I don't know what Andy Reid, you know, just kind of tweak the scheme here and there and allowed him and build that confidence in him. But now they want to throw and push the ball down the field vertically. But for me, it's all about defense. When you talk about moving to the playoffs and moving far in the playoffs, can you play defense? Can you run the ball when opposing defenses know that you're going to run the ball to eat up that clock? And when you talk about Spencer Ware and, you know, the running backs that they have now, and everyone was wondering when Jamal Charles, you know, went out with the injury, pretty much wrote the season off. But they're playing great defense down there now. Former linebacker coach who I've been around in my New York Jets days, who's now the defensive coordinator, Bob Sutton for the Kansas City Chiefs, he has been playing very inspired football right now. We know about Justin Houston and Tom Ali. They do a great job of getting after the quarterback. But being as though I played in the back end for so many years in my career, the one thing you love is those guys, that front seven, getting that pressure. And that means tips and overthrows, and you can sit on routes. And when you look at Sean Smith and some of the corners that they have now, that's one thing that they're able to do. We saw it on that Thursday night football game against the Denver Broncos, what this defense could be, but they could not put it together as a team at that particular time. But they played back in Denver, and they showed exactly what they can do, forcing 5 turnovers, I believe, from Peyton Manning, and which was his last game starting. So this Kansas City team is a very scary team. The thing is Kansas City cannot take Oakland lightly. Oakland is starting to turn a corner. I said it before. I said it 2 years ago. Give Oakland about 2 to 3 years to right the ship, and then this will eventually become maybe a divisional winning team. Not maybe a Super Bowl caliber team, but a team that's able to win the division. You know, you look at the fact of what Jack Del Rio has come in and just kind of changed the landscape of that team. You bring in Amari Cooper, you got Michael Crabtree, and then you look at the fact of at the position that you really need. And they had some problems ever since Rich Gannon trying to find that guy in the center, but Derek Carr has done a great job for him. So this is not going to be one of those games that Kansas City can say, well, we're playing against Oakland. This is the last game of the year. They're not really playing for anything, and we can just go out there and win. To me, those teams are the most dangerous. They have nothing to play for. If they can make their season-ending game that much better by forcing you to sit home with them, that's what they want to do. I'm giving Kansas City the nod in this game because they're on a 9-game winning streak, and they've learned how to win those close games. But believe me, it's not going to be a cakewalk, and the Oakland Raiders are going to fight just like their head coach used to fight when he was a player and when he was a linebacker at USC.
I absolutely agree, and I do believe that Jack Del Rio has brought a new attitude to the Oakland Raiders, and I've seen it, and over the years, like you just attested, they've started to bring some pieces in that's going to help them make them competitive. And a lot of people, I debate this a lot with a lot of people. They say that the AFC West is one of the weakest divisions in football, and they go on that base by record. And I look at them as like, you know what, this Oakland Raiders team this season has competed really well. They've got pieces that can compete against guys. The only problem is, can they finish games in spurts? We saw them take the Pittsburgh Steelers, down to the very wire in Pittsburgh. They played really well on the road. Derek Carr, I believe, is going to be a great quarterback for the future for the Raiders. He's already very impressive as is. Amari Cooper's only going to get better, and he's had a pretty good rookie campaign as well. As you mentioned, they re-signed Crabtree to an extension. I think if they get more guys healthy on that defense, they get Justin Tuck back next year healthy. If they decide to bring him back, they've got Khalil Mack on the other side, and they've got some pretty solid players on there. And I think that they'll, obviously with Woodson retiring is going to hurt in the secondary. However, I do think they will find some young, talented defensive backs who can grow and mold in Jack Del Rio's system, and they can be a solid team. They can compete. It's not that the AFC West is one of the worst divisions, because it's not. They've got competitive teams. San Diego's obviously been dealt with a really bad hand, with injuries. They've got a lot of guys on injured reserve, and I'm very excited to see how it goes. I do believe, looking back at the Kansas City's game against the Browns, I watched the game film on it, and, the offense with Alex Smith is very potented on, attacking, obviously solidifying the run. They'll try to keep defensive off their feet by running the ball. And Spencer Ware, who stepped in, he's done a really good job filling in for, Jamal Charles. And then they hit the quick post routes. They hit the corner routes with Travis Kelce, who I think is a very solid tight end in this league. I think he's underrated. And I know he gets praise from a lot of analysts, and I don't think he gets enough praise, though. He's a very talented piece to the Kansas City offense. Jeremy Macklin's having a good year as well. So, I'm eager to see where it goes. I think Oakland can come in, and I think Oakland really has nothing to lose. They're going to go all out. Charles Woodson's last game ever. He's going to be playing with a big chip on his shoulder. This is last time he'll ever be on the gridiron. And I'm sure you've had this feeling before. I'm sure being around all the guys when you were doing your coaching internship, did that itch ever come back to you to where you're like, man, I miss being out here. I miss doing this. I miss backpedaling. I miss the drills. I miss the pre-practice. Did you ever get that itch?
Yeah, but before I go there, I just want to kind of backtrack for a second. With the fact that the Oakland Raiders are going to lose Charles Woodson, here's what I thought as soon as I heard the scenario. Eric Weddle was kind of suspended. Well, not suspended, but put on IR for the remaining of the season because he decided to stay out and watch his daughter play, fined about $10,000 by the San Diego Chargers, and he's dealing with that growing injury, so I understand that. I just don't understand the fine. But I said, this is what's going to happen. Don't be surprised if it happens. They lose Charles Woodson. They go and sign Eric Weddle, and now he's that veteran piece that they need in their secondary. So, but don't be surprised. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. But to answer your question, yes, when I was doing the internship, you can't help but feel the itch when you've been around the game for so long. And for me, I get that question every year. Do you ever miss it? When you smell the fresh cut grass, it could be at a Little League stadium. It could be at an NFL stadium. It's something about that sensation, that smell that hits you, and it just takes you back to those moments when you were a kid and you in college or even playing the game professionally, and you kind of close your eyes for a second, you inhale, you exhale, and you go, yes, there it is, that fresh cut grass. So it's always there. But the biggest question I always ask myself is, could I play in today's NFL? And the reason I say that, and you notice we go back and forth with this on Twitter, is the fact that how the rules has changed the game. I know it's all about protecting the player, sometimes protecting the player from himself. But when I look at it from playing from the defensive side of the ball, how difficult it is to make a living trying to be aggressive, trying to do what your coaches have coached you since Little League to do, be an intimidating force across the middle, set the tone of the game. But now you don't know how to tackle. Now it's a strike zone, as I like to call it. It's baseball. I got to be between the breastplate and above the waist, because if I hit him too high, now I get a fine. If I go below the waist and attack the lower extremities, which are the legs, now people are saying I'm dirty. So it's just like, well, what do you want, a head or gut? And that's the thing that makes it really difficult. But the game of football, I love it. I loved it ever since I was a kid, growing up watching the Steelers, which was my first team as a child. So you never lose that instinct. You never lose that drive. And you never lose that, that want to go out there and be competitive. I wish that I could play in today's game, because there's several guys that I would want to match up my physicality with on a gridiron, but unfortunately that time has passed, and I can only reminisce as far as what I did as a player. But football is a great game. We just have to learn how to do it in a safe way.
Absolutely. And, it's funny you mentioned that. I think for me around the time, because I coach high school football down here in Grand Junction, Colorado, we travel to Denver quite often to play teams over there. And there's this certain, I don't know how to explain it, but there's this certain smell in the air. And it's kind of like you mentioned with like the freshly cut grass. You can tell when it's almost the end of spring and almost the beginning of summer. There's a certain smell that's in the air through the warm sky, the grass, everything else. And you're like, you know what? It is almost football season. The summer workouts are starting to begin. We're going to start doing 7-on-7 camps, and then the season starts after we start doing practice, and it's an exciting time. And I think I've really missed that ever since football's ended. And the cold weather, and not just being out there on practice, instructing kids in drills and watching film and just seeing how we could be better. But as you said, this game is amazing. No matter what rule change, limit defensive players nowadays, it's something that you'll always have a love for, because you were able to experience it at a fun and at a high level at a point in which, it wasn't as hindered as it is now, which is a good thing to say. Sometimes what I like to do is when I'm watching a game, I can see, the player's jersey. If I'm the defensive back, I put myself in the body of that defensive back, and I see the opponent and his jersey in front of me. And then as soon as the ball snapped, I watch his first couple of movements, and I kind of picture it like I'm lined up against him. And it's a crazy visual. Right. Your mind can create that visual for you, because it's truly a fun way to watch the game and to kind of feel like you're experiencing it. But it's very exciting. So, but yeah, I definitely get that all the time. Coaching these young kids, I always get that itch to come play. After tearing my ACL, I always thought, maybe I'm going to hang it up. I've won 3 championships. I've won all conference 3 years in a row, out of the 4 years that I've played, but there are times like, I have dreams. I have these dreams where I'm playing again, and I love it, and it brings that feeling back. And then there are those dreams, and you being a defensive back, speaking, kind of on the same line of dreams, have you ever had those nightmares where you're backpedaling during a game and you just fall down and you can't get up and the receiver's running by you? That is probably one of the worst feelings I've ever had in my entire life. It's crazy. It's crazy to have.
Well, I tell you what, my nightmares, and we used to discuss this in our secondary room, and when I played in Denver, it wasn't a nightmare of, tripping over yourself and watching a receiver run past you. The first one was, oversleeping and being late for the plane or meeting. That was the first nightmare. The second nightmare was, okay, of all the running backs in the league at that time, which 4 or 5 guys would you hate to have to come down full speed? It's mano a mano, it's just you and him. And you always talk about open field tackles. I mean, they are really very difficult, no matter who you're trying to tackle. But, I had a list of guys. And, it was LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, Jerome Bettis, Corey Dillon. Those were some of the guys that you had, what we call those nightmarish tackles. How do you bring this guy down? What is just you and it's just him? And for me, what I try to do to kind of take the nightmare part out of it, it's all about watching film. And you will watch that runner, because each of the guys that I just named to you, they have different running styles. And in order to offset that, or what I would call the great equalizer, is knowing their best moves, what plays that formations that they excel in, and trying to beat them to the punch. And for the most part, I was able to do it. But one of the nightmares almost came true. We're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is not the 05-06 season where we played them in the AFC Championship game for the right to win the Super Bowl, but it's a year prior. And we're down, we're losing the game, we need the ball back. It's about a minute and 43 seconds, and they're thinking we're going to milk the clock. So, of course, they're milking the clock. They're going to give it to Jerome Bettis because big, powerful running back, he's going to eat up yards, he's going to grind down the defense, and he's going to eat up the clock as well. So we're in cover two. For those who are not familiar with that, that's when you have two safeties high, and usually that means your corners are rolled up, jamming the wide receivers. So usually what happens in that cover two, you always know on outside run plays is going to be an alley. And they always tell the corner, force that receiver and press him to reduce the alley to restrict the running lane for the safety. So everything went perfect. I had Lenny Walls, who's Lenny's about a 6'5" corner. I had him at that time pressing the lane and kind of reducing it for me. So I took my read steps, and the ball was pitched at Jerome Bettis. And quickly, as quickly as I saw the play start to develop, that nightmarish theme played in my head, and everything slowed down. And it's almost like everything stopped for a second. And it was like, okay, Nick, here it is. The one thing that you feared. What are you going to do? Now, you have a couple of choices. Either you run down there, you throw your body into this massive man, or he's going to run you over. But you have about 2 seconds to decide what you're going to do. And after that, those 2 seconds, everything went in fast forward. Before I knew it, I was making an impact on Jerome Bettis. Now, what I did not know was I made one of what they call a textbook tackle. Meaning I wrapped him up, I got my head to his left side, and I put my helmet right on the ball. So all of a sudden, everything is quiet. All you can hear are my steps, and there's heavy breathing, and then there's an impact, and then there's this cheer. And I'm looking like, what just happened? I turn around, the ball flies out, falls in the hand of my teammate Bertrand Berry. We get the ball back. That sets us up to get the winning touchdown, and that's how we won the game. And after that point, I looked at it and said, some of these things that I said were nightmarish, these running backs, these type of situations, they would only come true if I would allow them to come true, and that's me falling into that trap of thinking that. So after that play, I was just like, there's not a person that I can't stand up to, and there's not a running back in this league that I cannot tackle. So I did have those nightmares, but I found a way to overcome them.
So essentially, the dream or the nightmare that you had kind of prepared you for the moment when it came, which that's awesome. And if, a lot of people, if some people who are younger are listening to the show, Jerome Bettis was a huge guy, a big guy. He was probably a lot of linebackers' worst nightmare because he was such a big guy. He's hard to bring down. So for you to come up and make that textbook tackle, ball across, head across, head into the ball, across the body, and then obviously the forced fumble, that's a great memory. And I'm sure that that's something you'll probably remember for the rest of your life. That's pretty awesome.
I have to send you. I'm going to pull up the photo, and I'm going to send it to you via Twitter. It was a great moment for me when I go out and talk to kids, and I tell them about how people always try to keep us down. And when I say us, not just myself, but everyone else, and load you down with fears about what you can't do, and there's just kind of invalidation. I talk to them about that particular play because when you look at it from the size difference, there was no way, whether I made a perfect tackle or not, that I was supposed to bring down a guy of that size. But like I said in that story is you got to start to visualize it before it happens. You have to believe that it's possible before it even takes place. Because you can't wait till you get there and you say, okay, well, I'm going to make that play. You have to have already played that game in your mind already before you got there. So as soon as that moment presents itself, it's just like breathing. It's natural. It's not a shock to you. So to me, I'll say that to your listeners to do the same thing because Coach Shanahan used to preach that all the time. visualize that play, visualize that moment before it actually takes place, and that helps prepare you when you're in the thick of things.
And that's a great message. I remember one thing, I think a quote that I remember seeing him say was tough times don't last, tough people do. And Coach Shanahan, I'm sure, you got to play under him, embodied that kind of message of it doesn't matter about what circumstance you face, as long as if you attack it with your head up, there's always a fighting chance that you have an opportunity to make the most out of it. And definitely I think Coach Shanahan got the short end of the stick in Washington. I think he saw something, obviously developmentally in Kirk Cousins at a time that did make sense, to most of the media and probably to the Redskins, nation at the time. They didn't see that, but Coach Shanahan, a great coach. I remember being in 6th or 7th grade when the Broncos announced that they were moving on from him, and I remember getting all teary-eyed and sad, because I got the press conference that they did, and I was like, man, is this really happening? Who's gonna come in now? And that was a big carousel.
Yeah.
And that was a crazy time. So I mean, it's just I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes and to be able to play under some of these great coaches that you have over the the course of your career. It's an awesome thing. So, so 2 topics we're gonna actually talk about here on the Coach's Corner podcast here with former Denver Broncos safety Nick Ferguson. Obviously with the movie Concussion that just came out, it's kind of caused a little bit of controversy along the media world and it's created some questions. A lot of I've seen some parents. Some former NFL players come forward and say maybe the game is too risky, or coming out and saying high school kids shouldn't be playing high school football because of the fact of the risk to the head. And I'll give my reaction to that in just a moment. But you mentioned that you went this weekend and you saw Concussion. How did that go for you?
Well, I can tell you what, I mean, I kind of knew what to expect going in, because when you play the game and you've had a concussion, you know what comes along with it. I just wanted to see how it was going to be portrayed by Hollywood. But I can tell you this, I mean, the theater was filled with people, both men and women. And usually when people watch a movie of this caliber, usually it's quiet. And for the most part, in a lot of the scenes, everyone was quiet, trying to absorb what they were seeing on the screen. But then after the image, left off and they went to a more, subtle, kind of a softer, portrayal on film, you can hear individuals making statements or talking about it inside the theater. And even when the movie was over, and the overwhelming thing that I got out of it for those people who went, they really enjoyed the movie. But it gave them a whole different perspective on the game itself. And let me start by saying this too as well. Even though the movie is called Concussion and it really kind of highlights things that happen in the NFL, let's not be mistaken that you got hockey, you have baseball, and even it happens sometimes in basketball. If you play soccer or rugby, you're kind of putting yourself in a position where concussion can happen. So it's all about the education part of it. But for the most part, they were happy about the movie, but they were shocked at the same time. They couldn't believe that guys at that particular time were going through what they were going through, and then watching the game and how it's come from that standpoint to where we are now, and seeing some of the graphic hits and things of that nature. It changed their perspective as far as how they view the game, how they look at the individuals who play the game, because when now in the offseason a guy is looking for an extra $5 million, now people may have the idea now I understand why he wants that extra $5 million. Right, because he may be making $5 million or $6 million a year. You may be making $50,000 a year, and you cannot understand it. But after watching the movie, maybe you have a better opportunity to understand the psyche of what goes into the player's mentality and what they have to deal with. And when you see some of the individuals who they talk about, and everyone knows about Junior Seau, I think that was kind of the eye-opener for a lot of people in the media, a lot of individuals who were fans, a lot of players themselves who, looked up to Junior Seau. I mean, I came up, watching him play, and then when I was in Buffalo, the Bills played the San Diego Chargers a lot, so I got a chance to watch him play. So when he passed and he took his life, it was rather shocking. It was just like, well, this thing is real. It's not like it's just happening to a select few guys. It happens to Junior Seau, and he's like Mr. Football. Right, so it just kind of opens your eyes. And I remember as we walked out of the theater, my wife put her hand on my shoulder, and she just rubbed my shoulder as to say she had no idea. She had no idea just the physicality of the game could possibly produce that outcome. It's not saying that that would definitely be something that happens to me, but, knowing as though you're playing a physical game, and I was very physical when I played, and I did have a concussion, and one of the concussions that I had, luckily my wife never saw. To this day, she's never seen it, and I never saw the play until I went back to the Denver Broncos facility this past summer, and I was doing a coaching internship. I didn't want to watch the play, but I said, you know what? In order to get over it, I had to watch the play. It was a game we were playing against the Steelers. Hines Ward, everyone knows about Hines Ward, and it was one of those plays. I'm coming down here to make a tackle on Willie Parker, and, he's standing right there, and boom, he gave me a shot to the temple, and, and I went down. And to watch that, for me to watch that myself, knowing as though I went through that. Now, I had to sit there and watch it. It was tough to sit there and watch. I got a little angry. I got a little angry at myself because I said, look, I should have played that a whole lot better knowing the personnel that I was dealing with, but also how at that time Hines Ward was praised for taking those cheap shots on unsuspecting defenders. But, football is a very tough game. My thing, when I look at that movie, I wish that, and the league is trying to do some things to kind of better help, treat, recognize, and diagnose concussions, but you always look for the extra effort. What more can we do? How much more can we be informed as players? How much more can we be informed as parents? Because it's always education first. If players know the signs that they need to be aware of themselves, then they can tell the team. And the players have to know that the environment is safe for them to do that. Because some guys won't tell about a concussion or any other injury because they're afraid of how that's going to affect them as far as their relationship with the team and will they remain with that team from that standpoint. So a safe environment has to be created where guys feel free that they can do that without it being held against them. And then as teammates, you got to look out for your buddy. Don't say you're my teammate and I'm concussed, I'm not in my right frame of mind, and allow me to go back out there on the field. So hopefully the movie opens up a lot of people's eyes to the fact that not what just football players go through, but just athletes who play physical activity go through.
Yeah, and it's crazy that you mentioned that because I've had 4 concussions in my total career playing from high school to arena league, and as you said, I went back and I think my first concussion that I ever had happened my junior year of high school. I remember it was on it was on a punt, and I was a gunner, and I was being covered by two defenders. You know how they do it in the NFL. They have 2 defenders guarding 1 gunner, and I remember I was just in my head. I was planning on how to get through there, and then when I go back on film, I go through and I see it, and I get past the guy, and as soon as the punt returner catches the ball, I go helmet to helmet with him. I go head first, and then after that, I don't remember anything. So I think that was my first ever concussion. I'd say the one that the movie really touched based on that really, affected me the most was my concussion that I got my senior year of high school. It was, I think it was the game after our homecoming game. I was on the road at Willamette University, traveling down there, and I remember on film, when I look at it, I was covering this wide receiver, a guy who I played against for many years, and he ran a little curl route, and the quarterback found time to extend, so he tried running some more, and he pushed off me a little bit, and he came back and he caught the ball. And so when I went to go tackle him, I kind of missed, and it was kind of, a very fundamental error that I know when looking back at the film, I shouldn't have made that mistake. So I'm trailing, I'm chasing him, and all of a sudden my teammate, who's a safety, comes barreling down the side in the camera, and you see it, and I just get hit right in the side of the head, and I was out. I was literally knocked out, and you see it on film, and I'll share it with you on Twitter. But I'm laying there, And then the next clip goes on and it shows that I'm still in the game, and I don't remember any of this. It just shows I'm still in the game, and I'm looking around and I've got my hands up like, what's going on? And then the other team scores on a running play afterwards. But at that point in time, I kind of look at it now, and I look at the safety measures that I have to take now as a coach in recognizing concussions in my athletes. And it just kind of scared me, the fact that I was left in the game when I shouldn't have been in the game. And it was kind of scary to look back on. And with that, my concussion symptoms that I had lasted for up to 6 months. So I had a pretty severe concussion. What the neurologist told me in Eugene, Oregon, was that I suffered a double concussion. So what happened is, when I got hit from the side, my brain jolted to one side and then jolted to the other quick. Like, I can't explain how to designate this. If you put a basketball in a laundry basket and you hit it from the side, it'll go side to side. And that's kind of what happened to my brain. And so what the neurologist told me, and I saw it, and I saw that because I had those symptoms, I had I had swelling in my brain. Will Smith's character, Bennett Omalu, Dr. Omalu, who's, real life character, as he explained what that is that the brain is essentially being, choked. It's being compressed. And so with that, what happened was I fell into mood swings. I had very severe mood swings. I became angry. I became depressed. I had anxiety, and I had no idea why. It was all out of my control. But I knew at that time, and I talked to my grandmother to this very day, and she tells me that I was a different person during that time. And so what happened was, with time, it eventually got better. I got cleared to play. So I went on, tried out in the Arena League, got on, and I look back at all that, and it's kind of scary, and it kind of makes me more of an advocate to know that, what, us as athletes, we understand the risks that we're taking. As soon as we go out and we put the helmet on, we put the cleats on, we know that there's a potential risk of harm. There's a potential risk of death. And, I look at it as any other way. You look at guys who work on the oil fields, the rigs. They know that going into that job, there's a risk that they can potentially get really hurt or die. And I think as athletes, we understand that there's always some sort of risk that we're aware of, that we don't think will happen but could happen. I think we're always made aware of that. And so, I think the movie did a great job of just creating that kind of awareness of, these things can happen. And these are some of the things that did happen. So I don't know if you know Vance Johnson. Do you know Vance Johnson? He's a former Denver Bronco.
Yes, I do.
So Vance Johnson, I was speaking to him, and I asked him about the Concussion movie. He created this really, really deep post. Vance Johnson, he was an athlete. He suffered from addiction. He was addicted to alcohol and many things. And he's sober now. He's a great advocate for sobriety. And this was his response to the Concussion movie that he said. He said, it's 2 a.m. and I'm up thinking of this movie that I watched a few hours ago called Concussion. He says, I'm not even sure where to go with this, except to say that it was hard as sitting in a theater of 500 people, being probably the only former NFL player, and listening to all the voices in the theater talking and feeling the pain of what they were witnessing, let alone the voices in my head talking. I'm watching my story with a different ending so far. I tried to get up and walk out twice, 3 times, but I was sitting in the middle of the theater, and between crying, trying to eat popcorn, and thinking someone would recognize me, I sat in it. I'm glad I did, but I came home a broken man, sober but seeing everything different. I've seen so many former ball players struggle with addiction, domestic issues, financial, and the list goes on, and now I'm seeing what can be the cause. I'm glad I watched. I still see the beauty of the game and how these young warriors have made a decision to risk it all for fame and fortune, not to mention identity and acclaim. I'm up a lot at night, every night. I'm up now, and I pray for my boys on the field. I think I will donate my brain so the study can continue when God calls me home, and that's a good thing. I know where home is. Well, now another side of me, and there's sobriety in that, which I thought was a very powerful message from a guy who experienced some of these, financial hardships, obviously dealing, with addiction as well. To hear his side of that story really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more into the perspective of it, because as we saw with Mike Webster, and all the accounts within his final days, is that he was a different man. He looked like he was dealing with something that no one knew what it was. He was, not himself. And I think a lot of that can be attested to that, the swelling of the brain and just, it being choked essentially. So, I look at that, combined with your response and how, you being a former NFL player, experiencing, what a concussion's like and going through that in the NFL, to just me, having a concussion in general as an athlete and hearing his story, it makes me more aware of the fact that, it's a risk that always has to be acknowledged. I don't think it should be to the point where it takes away sports from our youth. I think sports does a great thing for our youth, especially in this community, and I can attest to that. Sports is I believe, saved my life as well. So, a lot of the arguments that I did see over this week, and I saw it on some ESPN, they debated it on First Take. They were talking about, should high school football be taken away after concussion's been released? And my reply to that is no, I don't really believe so. We know the risk. The risk has always been there. The research has been a lot better, more improved over the years with the latest, technology that's come out, especially in neuroscience, and medicine. And I don't think you take away the game because of that, because we've always known it's always been there. The risk has always been there, and I just kind of struggle because high school athletics at this point right now in this day and age is already struggling. Programs are having to fund themselves because athletic budgets are being cut because of it. I really do believe that this movie is very educational and informal to a lot of people who may not understand what, guys like yourself or Vance Johnson or Mike Webster actually went through. So I think Concussion was a very powerful part on that, just from my eyes.
Well, I'll say this, if you haven't seen the movie, please go out and see it. And I've had a chance to have some short conversation with a couple of guys who are former players who've had an opportunity to watch the movie. But the first thing I'll say, even Dr. Malu said in the movie himself, he's not trying to destroy football. That's not what he's trying to do. He's just trying to educate people about something that is, I don't want to say it's a hidden evil. And had he not, tried to go far and beyond the call of duty to figure out what happened to Mike Webster, we might not even know to this day. And I think, with education, with more research, we can make the game safe. But it's not just the game that you worry about. You look at race car drivers. You look at the fact of how they've had to change the kind of the carriage of the car and the neck support for those race car drivers and the helmets or whatever. That within itself is risky. I mean, taking a shower is risky. You can slip on a bar of soap. Riding a roller coaster, it's all risky. The human body was only made for certain things, and some of the things I just named, maybe not so. But if you educate yourself and you know the signs, maybe you can prevent yourselves from going down that road and encountering some of these kind of situations. And also, when you look at armed forces, when you look at, they talk about these IEDs or IUDs, whatever they call them, and these roadside bombs and the shock that these troops actually undergo. I mean, that could be one of the reasons that they're having issues. And when you talk about technology, the head protection needs to just kind of be upgraded on all levels. Hockey, baseball. I mean, look at baseball. I mean, they changed the rules as far as being able to run into the catcher. Buster Posey, gets knocked out, he gets a concussion, and then now everyone wants to change the rules. So I think there's always going to be this ever-evolving, this evolution that takes part in every sport. And it should be that way. Change the rules to better help protect players. I mean, could we at some point see pitchers with some kind of protective headgear? Maybe so. I mean, we've seen individuals who might have been third base coaches or first base coaches, take a ball or a bat, and even fans in the stands in baseball games. So, it's just a whole safety idea. And the idea is not to make everyone panic. It's just the fact of know the rules, know the symptoms. Let's try to get better technology to better help, head protection. If a guy is concussed, you hold him out. There's this concussion protocol that they now have in the NFL. If he passes the protocol, maybe we put him back in there, or maybe we just hold him out for another quarter, because just like you said, you had a double concussion. Your brain, went from side to side on either side of your skull, bruising, both the right and left side. So if a guy already has a concussion, and from what I've heard is that once you get a concussion, you're possibly prone to getting another concussion. And if that is the case, then you don't put a guy back in the game right away. And it could be one of those games that you desperately need to either win a Super Bowl or to get in the Super Bowl or save a coach's job. But what we have to think about first is the athlete. And like you said, there's a lot of high school programs that are cutting the funds, and the programs have to fund themselves. I don't think the solution is that you cut out high school athletics and football being one of those. No, you educate you guys. You sit them down and you teach them. And that's a great thing about coaching. And you know this. The coach is not out there to just draw up X's and O's and yell at the kids. You have to be a teacher. Teach them the proper fundamentals so they know the proper foot placement, the proper head placement, how to take their head out of the equation when you're making a tackle, whether it's a small guy that you're trying to bring down or it's a massive guy you're trying to bring down. It's just head up, eyes up, see what you're tackling, wrap your arms, run your feet, and use your legs when you tackle them. Don't try to just ram your body into them like you some kind of battering ram. So there's a lot of steps and a lot of procedures that everyone needs to go through to make sure, whether it's on the high school level, Pop Warner, college, and even pros, that guys are doing the right thing to protect themselves and, more importantly, their teammates, because friendly fire is just as dangerous as you trying to bear down and make a tackle yourself, as you so eloquently put earlier when we had this discussion.
Oh, man, and you talk about friendly fire, and we've seen quite a bit. I've seen Cam Chancellor friendly fire, Earl Thomas. I've seen T.J. Ward friendly fire, Chris Harris Jr. against the Colts. And you look at those safeties who have that, downhill running, and this, being back 12 to 14 yards from the line of scrimmage, seeing where the play's going and having that quicker, advantage to run downhill, that makes you even faster, and that makes your hit power, your explosiveness even more effective, which is crazy. And so I couldn't even imagine, me being, the size that I am, getting hit by a guy who's running essentially maybe 21 miles an hour, jacked up with muscle and just strength. I couldn't even imagine it. So, friendly fire is definitely a crazy thing. I think I've had that happen to me one time, and it was on a punt return, actually. We have this guy, he played overseas for France. He was their league MVP over there in France in one of their pro leagues. And I remember on a punt return, I went to go block one of the gunners, and I was riding him on his hip. And then all of a sudden, I just got blasted from the side by my own guy who tried to get the guy that I was covering. I just remember oh my goodness, I felt like I was in a car wreck essentially. And when a lot of people talk about football and concussions, and they talk about it's like a collision, it's like a car wreck, a collision sport. Essentially, in a sense, yes, it is. But, as you said, head up, eyes up, the proper teachings. And I think as coaches, we have to have that certification now from heads up training with USA Football in order to be considered coaches, to even be able to have our jobs. We have to have that, to be able to recognize that in kids, because more and more important, it's all about, protecting, making sure our youth is taught the right technique, the right fundamentals, and also is the safest. So, a big advocate for that. I can definitely see where it's coming from. I don't agree. I think that we shouldn't take sports away. That doesn't help anything. We have a role as teachers, as coaches, to be teachers, to teach more than just football, to teach about accountability, responsibility, respect, things like that. So on the note of coaching, you and I, we were tweeting with Shannon Sharp. We were tweeting, with a bunch of guys on Twitter, Monday Night Football, during the Bengals and the Broncos game. And, the Bengals, A.J. McCarron and their wide receivers. And I noticed this on film, and because I broke down probably about 3 or 4 weeks of film, and I took it back to a Monday Night Football game where they were actually playing. I forgot who they were playing against, but where Mohamed Sanu ran out of the Wildcat, the same play that he scored on. You mentioned that you had a drill that would help the Denver DBs be able to cover those sideline routes, those deep comeback out routes that we saw from A.J. Green, Mohamed Sanu, and guys like that for the Cincinnati Bengals, because that's a tough route to cover. Do you mind explaining to our listeners here what drill that was?
Well, man-to-man coverage is always a difficult coverage to teach because you have guys who have different skill set. You have guys who are really quick in short spaces, and they may be one of those 5'9" corners, and you may have long, lengthy guys like a Richard Sherman guy who has long arms. So he does a lot of his work at the line of scrimmage. And to me, that's where it begins. You want to limit the amount of running you do down the field by winning at the line of scrimmage. And some coaches teach, quick jam to help the corners read. But for me, it's always move your feet first because you know this. If you throw that hand out there and you lock your hips, now you presented a receiver with, a surface that he can now pull you by and get on top of you. So when you talk about those sideline routes, you move your feet first. Then you try to stay in phase with the wide receiver. And what I mean by in phase with him, you try to make sure that your body's in close contact with his body. So if there is a tight throw, you can actually go up and go through the outside hand, or if it's an outside throw, like maybe a back shoulder fade, you can put your foot in the ground and stick your hand kind of like you extend your hand out. And what you do is, most guys, when you watch games, you see them swatting. And they're swatting like they're trying to swat a fly on a hot summer's day. You don't do that because when you look at the level of reaction time, when you start to swat and the velocity of that ball being dropped in there, there's a potential that you may whiff and you miss the ball. The thing is, you extend that hand straight out and you turn that hand like palm down and you swipe down. That way, if it's one of those back shoulder fades, now you force a tight throw and you force what could be a tight catch by that wide receiver. Where he now has to really focus because if you hit that ball and you hit that hand, that ball is either going to be deflected or it can be deflected to him. But if he makes that catch off of a deflection, he deserves to make that catch. But that's how you defend what I consider those outside low throws that quarterbacks now try to throw from either that back shoulder or they throw at their back hip because now they know the receiver knows the route. He's going to drive hard upfield and he's going to push back and kind of turn back. So you have to make sure you stay in phase with the wide receiver so now you can kind of react back to that ball. But also, if that ball is kind of thrown up in the air, don't try to go to the hand that's closest to you. Go through that outside hand, almost like palm to palm, and try to, with force and velocity, try to slap that palm and rake it down. Because now you're forcing that wide receiver to now catch the ball one hand grab inside. And now, Odell Beckham Jr. has made some great catches in the league, but there are not a lot of wide receivers in the league that can make those one-hand tough grabs like Odell Beckham can on a consistent basis. So that's how, I learned to do it. That's how I try to teach kids now the best way to do it. Don't wave at it. Stick that hand straight on out there and just kind of wipe down with that palm.
And that's great technique, and we talked about this too. And with Bradley Roby, we saw him on a couple occasions. We saw one occasion where we talked about where he missed the swipe of the ball and it was caught. And that perfect example that you just described would be the best solution for that. You want to be aggressive, but you don't want to be aggressive to a point where you whiff the tackle, as you said, whiffing. And then he went on and he followed up on the next play with that quick press that you talked about, and then he squeezed and he defended the pass, and it was a great breakup. And it was great coverage on number 82 for the Cincinnati Bengals. And then you talk about that, we look at that back shoulder fade that A.J. McCarron threw to A.J. Green for the first touchdown. You look at Talib's coverage. It was pretty great coverage, but it was at the perfect spot where only A.J. Green could get it. And it was a great throw by, A.J. McCarron, who, as you said, put it in a spot good enough to where he could, A.J. Green knew the route. He knew how to do it, and I think it's hard to cover. When I watched Aqib Talib, and I watch him on film, I haven't seen many games where he's really pressed coverage. I see him usually playing maybe 5 or 6 yards off, trying to read that 3-step drop that he's been really great at doing, because he talked about this one time where he just sits and he reads that 3-step drop and he breaks before the quarterback even knows that he's going to throw the ball there, and that's how he's had those pick sixes that we saw earlier in this season. I think he's one of the best NFL's cover corners playing off I haven't seen him play too much, man or press in this coverage situation. But we've seen Chris Harris play a lot of press. Roby's played a lot of press. Out of these Denver DBs, obviously we saw Darian Stewart return. We saw T.J. Ward return. What impact did they have, on this game? Because essentially this was a very big game, and obviously being down 14-0, the pressure was felt by these guys. What adjustments did Wade Phillips make in the second half that made it a lot easier for this Denver defense to accommodate the weapons that Cincinnati essentially had for them?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, having T.J. Ward and Darren Stewart back in the fold, it definitely changes, what you could do in your back end. Now you can take more risk outside. Now you can take more risk inside with your front seven. Now when teams try to open up the linebackers and create that mismatch, now you know that you have safeties that can actually come down here and being aggressive under control. They can make those tackles as well. So it allows you to do so many different things with your defense that you haven't been able to do before. And you got to think, when you don't have a guy like T.J. Ward who can play, in the back end, and now you bring him down in the box like an extra linebacker as far as run support. When you don't have him in the fold, it makes it really difficult for you. It puts a lot of pressure on your linebackers and your guys who are rushing to maintain those rushing lanes, because you know that you don't have that safety net behind you who can actually make up for you if you don't maintain your lane integrity. So having him back, that definitely helped. But now he's dealing with that same ankle injury that kept him out. You just have to see if he'll be able to go this week against San Diego. But Darren Stewart, ever since he came with Coon from Baltimore, I mean, he made his presence felt early on in the year, starting with that first game of the season against Baltimore. He's always around the ball, creating, tough situation and game-changing plays to give the ball back to the defense. So it's great to have those guys back. David Bruton, who's out with some injuries of his own, Omar Bolden, who's nursing a hamstring. Those affect how you play your sub packages. What are you able to do on first and third down as far as your defense? Maybe you bring in Shaquille Barrett. Maybe you don't now that you have these guys back. But you got to be healthy when you're trying to make a playoff push, and you need your impact players to be on the field at the same time.
Yeah, and right now Denver is kind of really dealing with some injuries, especially on that top-ranked defense. Brandon Marshall, has came out today, MRIs revealed to be negative. X-rays were negative. He has a mild ankle sprain. He says he should be able to play this week. T.J. Ward said he had a minor setback in his ankle injury, a high ankle sprain. Those are hard to come back from because they linger on. It's a ligament issue. But having them back certainly helps. And to be honest with you, I think outside of it, I know Wade Phillips brought in Shiloh Kao and Josh Bush. I think Josh Bush has been playing better out of the two. I think he's been the most impressive. He had a pick against Pittsburgh. I think he's played solid. He made a couple mistakes in the open field tackling, as we saw against Tyler Kroft, the tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals. He had that one play where he just didn't follow through. He didn't, drive his feet through. He could have made the tackle, and he just kind of whiffed it a tiny bit. But other than that, I think he's played impressive enough. Omar Bolden is rumored to be back on action, back on the field this weekend. He's sat out the last few games with a hamstring issue, and those ones are lingering as well. So, obviously getting healthy is probably the number one priority for this Denver Broncos team. Obviously, they play the Chargers this weekend, and Chargers are going to have a lot of guys out there. Obviously, as you mentioned, Eric Weddle being put on injured reserve. A lot of other guys on injured reserve as well. Big game. If Denver wins that game and New England loses on the road at Miami, Denver secures the number one seed, a first-round bye, and home field advantage to the playoffs, which I think would play, mightily into their factor. If Denver holds on to the number 2 seed by beating San Diego this week, I do believe that extra week will help get these guys back and healthy. And then it's been noted today that Peyton Manning will be back. He will be in uniform this weekend, but he will be backing up Brock Osweiler, and he's in full support of it. Came out saying that he's prepared. He's excited to be back, to be at this position, to be able to be not in street clothes, and to be able to help Brock and his team in any way that they need. And so I think that's a very class act with Peyton. Obviously, it's been a really rough week, really rough year for that matter for Peyton Manning amidst, the injuries, the HGH allegations that we just heard about this previous weekend. And, we had a great conversation about that. It's crazy. So one more thing I actually really want to talk to you about before I let you go enjoy the rest of your evening is, We saw yesterday Chip Kelly got fired from the Philadelphia Eagles on right before the final week of the season. What were your thoughts on that? And where could we potentially see Chip Kelly end up this next coming year? Is it college football or is it in the NFL?
Well, that was the thing coming into the season. I'll start off by saying, let me back up for a second. Chip Kelly is an excellent offensive coordinator. We saw with what he was able to do in Oregon, that showed us his brilliance. He came to the Philadelphia Eagles with a whole different attitude, and yes, the NFL has been worked the same way for so many years with the same type of philosophies, and everyone's saying, hey, listen, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. But I love the approach that he came in with. I mean, Andy Reid was there. They had this Taco Tuesdays and all of that. Chip Kelly understood that in order to go out and play great football, you had to get the one thing in shape that you needed to, and that was your body. You don't go out and buy a Bentley or Ferrari and you don't keep up with monthly maintenance. You don't put cheap gas in it. So with him understanding and trying to change the culture and how the players actually thought and their approach to the game, and just the physical, I guess, looking at your body and the physical nature, knowing that you have to take care of your body because your body takes care of you. I love that approach. I wish so many other teams went with that philosophy. Now, where I would disagree with him slightly, and this is the thing that cost him his job, is when you assume that head coach and that GM role, the one job by itself, it's hard enough. It's hard enough to be a GM. It's hard enough to be a head coach, but you're assuming too many hats, and it makes it very difficult. You need a buffer. You need someone to say, hey, coach, listen, I don't think that guy's a great fit in our system because of his attitude. He doesn't fit in our locker room. He doesn't really fit our scheme of what we're trying to build here. But when you are the guy that are calling all the shots, you're calling the plays on the field, you're setting up, things that happen on the personnel side of the ball, and they don't work, I mean, someone's got to get fired. I mean, if there's two individuals, if it's Chip Kelly and someone else has a GM job and things are not working out from the personnel standpoint, and it was the personnel guy who put his stamp approval on it, then that guy's going to be out of the job. But, when Jeffrey Lurie told Chip, listen, all you have to do is surrender the GM duties. You have your job. Chip was like, no. I don't want to do that. But, when you go out and you try to do something different, you're going to have the bullseye on your back. If it works, you're brilliant. If it doesn't work, now you consider a failure. And when he came in with this new philosophy after going to the playoffs his first year and has a record of 26-21, no Deshaun Jackson, no Jeremy Maclin, you trade Nick Foles, and then to add insult to injury, you trade LaShawn McCoy. People in Philly didn't really like that, but they say, listen, okay, Chip knows what he's doing. He's a mad scientist, so whatever he's doing is going to work. But when it doesn't work, you have no choice but to fire Chip Kelly. Now, I think he could possibly end up back in the NFL real soon. Of course, the first place you look is Tennessee. And timing is everything. No Ken Wisenhunt. Mike Mularkey's not going to keep that job. And a guy who everyone thought you wanted in Philadelphia, you get him down in Tennessee. And then they have some great young wide receivers that are there. You just need to go out in a draft and get a running back. Tennessee is sitting at 3-13. Right now. They play the Indianapolis Colts, who are fighting for their playoff lives. So that game right there is a toss-up. But to me, you're going to be in maybe that 2 to 4 range as far as picking in the first round of the draft. So if you bring Chip Kelly in, he already has his quarterback. You try to go through free agency and in the draft and build some pieces and add some depth on the defensive side of the ball. But I think Chip is best suited right now to be a head coach calling offensive plays. Allow someone else to carry that burden, and then now You can always go back and revisit it once you start winning ball games. But right now, I think the Tennessee Titans are the best place for Chip Kelly right now if he wants to remain in the NFL.
I certainly agree with that. As you mentioned, he's got a perfect fit. Obviously, Philadelphia tried trading up to get Marcus Mariota in the draft. It didn't work out. The offer sheet that Philadelphia offered Tennessee was unbelievable. The couple of named players that you had Cox on there as well. And Tennessee is stuck to their guns. They're sticking with it, and they got Mariota. I think if Chip Kelly reunites with Marcus Mariota, as you mentioned, they have some talented receivers down there in Tennessee. If they get a running back, I think they'll be okay. They'll have enough pieces. I like Delanie Walker. Delanie Walker has been a surprise for me this year. A guy we haven't heard too much of, but he had a pretty great year this year. You know, Mariota's hurt, been banged up. I think offensive line is a big thing as well that the Tennessee Titans need to look at in the draft. However, I think if you bring in Chip Kelly's scheme a little bit, it's more so of downhill, fast pace. You know, as you mentioned, having your body in shape, which is exactly what he embodied at the University of Oregon. He actually provided my head coach, the current head coach of the Oregon Ducks right now, Mark Helfrich, was my former coach in high school. And so he provided him with essentially a playbook. So as soon as Chip Kelly launched the no-huddle offense in college football for Oregon Ducks, when we saw Oregon become successful and winning games, my high school that I actually played for adapted that same exact playbook, the same exact philosophy of a play being run every 14 seconds. And it was pretty crazy to see. So I think with Mariota there, I think, you know, obviously we saw him develop more into a pocket passer. He had to in the system down there with Ken Wisenhunt, and he did okay. He put up some pretty good numbers. You know, there were games where he struggled. You know, I see that as a rookie. We look at Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston had his rookie struggles as well, but I think Marcus Mariota shined a little bit as well. We saw him have a game where he rushed for 100 yards, which is something we haven't seen a quarterback do in the NFL since, Terrell Pryor was an Oakland Raider. And that happened a few years ago against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Oakland. So, you know, I think it's good. You know, obviously, as you mentioned, Chip Kelly said that he still wanted to keep his GM spot, and the owner of the Eagles said, no, we can't have that happen. So bye-bye, Chip. I know I've got an actor friend who his name's David Boreanaz. He's a big Philadelphia Eagles fan, and he was ecstatic that Chip was gone. And they were thinking about if the Eagles were to bring anybody, they were like they should bring in some guy like Matt Patricia or Josh McDaniels, and guys who I think would probably be a pretty solid fit in that system. I think Matt Patricia's done a good job with what he's had down there in New England. However, I think Josh McDaniels would probably be the more coveted guy that teams would go after this season. Probably he's going to be asked to be interviewed by some of these teams. But I do see, and I do have a hunch in my stomach that Chip Kelly will end up in Tennessee one way or another. So I'm excited to see how this all pans out.
But here's what I say about the idea of Josh McDaniel or Patricia actually becoming the next head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, or what could be a plethora of jobs open after Black Monday. To me, you got to look at the environment that you're stepping into. I mean, every coach wants to be a head coach in the league at some point. And you want to make sure it's the right time and the right team with the right personnel. And you're going into an organization that has an owner that believes in you and will allow you to put the pieces in place to play the style of offensive defense that you need to make that team successful. But my only question is, and it would be for these two guys if they were sitting right in front of me, do you gamble and take that risk? And Josh has already done that already. Do you gamble and take that risk to try to go out there, or you stay within an organization that knows you, you know everyone, and that the opportunity to play in a meaningful game in the month of January, it's always there. Now, I do know Tom Brady is going to have to retire at some point. I do understand that. But do you go ahead and jump ship and run the risk of missing out on a couple, maybe one or two more Super Bowl appearances, or you say, listen, my cup is filled. I've gone to the Super Bowl. I've been there. I have a couple in my pocket. We've lost some, but it's now time for me to move on and be the head coach. That's the only thing I would ask those two guys.
Yeah, understandable. And I think when we look at Josh McDaniels, I think, you know, looking back at the whole situation that he inherited with this Denver Broncos team, that he essentially came in, got rid of Jay Cutler, and inherited Kyle Orton. I don't think he was truly ready for what it was like to be an NFL head coach. And I think we saw that on national TV a few times. Obviously, they started out 5-0, the Denver Broncos did that year, and it was like, okay, this guy's probably got it. And then the collapse kind of came, and losses started happening. We saw the meltdown on Thursday Night Football where he was yelling at his offensive line, all we're trying to do is win a effing game on live TV. The cameras caught that. I just think that year, and it was a quick departure for Josh McDaniels. I don't think he was truly ready yet. However, I think he's a great coordinator, and I do believe that if I'm Josh McDaniels, I probably want to stay in New England for a few more years, with the system, with the guys like Tom Brady and the chance to make it to the playoffs and to have potentially a few more Super Bowl appearances in my pocket before I'm truly ready. I'm sure there's still so much more he can still learn from Bill Belichick down there. So, there's a lot of question marks, a lot of coaching things. And I know we talked about it earlier. Obviously we could potentially see a complete clean out of the NFC least outside of Jay Gruden, who the Washington Redskins, if you were to tell me at the beginning of this season that the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Philadelphia Eagles would be underneath the Washington Redskins this year, I would tell you, you're crazy. You are crazy. But no, you know what? It's different. They're playing really good. Jordan Reed's playing phenomenal. He's a very young and athletic tight end who's been hindered by injuries in the past couple years, but he's healthy, and I think he's pretty good. And Kirk Cousins is playing pretty lights-out football right now, and as he would say, you like that. And there was one punchline I wanted to make with the Chip Kelly thing. I think Chip Kelly, as you said, with the coach and the GM role, I think Chip Kelly kind of got that Hollywood bravado in him. He got it to where he's this Hollywood actor, but he also wanted to direct his next picture that he stars in. And obviously it turns up being a box office disaster. I think that's exactly what happened with Philadelphia Eagles and Chip Kelly.
Well, yeah, I think that's it. It definitely would happen with Chip Kelly. And, Bill Parcells says that if you want, what is the whole thing? If you want me to make the food, I think you have to allow me to buy the groceries or whatever. And I guess Chip Kelly was trying to do that. And he even said himself that, the scheme is more important than the player. That's great. A great philosophy if you're talking about college football. And college football is all about the coaches. In the NFL, it's all about the players. They're the ones that go out and execute at a high level for 16, 17 weeks of the NFL season. So those are the individuals that are important. I think, when Chip Kelly looks back on this, obviously there's always things that you wish that you did different. And I guess once he moves on, he gets another coaching job, another opportunity in the NFL, or maybe in college football. Maybe he keeps certain things the same, but then he makes certain adjustments based upon the information that he has before him now and his experience. So it's yet to be seen whether he gets another job in the NFL, at least this season or in 2016. But once again, the obvious choice, and it seems like the football gods have made it possible for him to do this, to just kind of make that transition from Philadelphia to Tennessee. It's not going to be an easy transition, but at least you have one of the more important pieces already sitting there awaiting you, and just all you have to do is just go there and implement your scheme. And you got a receiver with Dorial Green Beckham. His big body, you coach him up. They could have something very special in what were considered to be a very weak AFC South division. So Chip Kelly can go there and run roughshod over that division for sure.
Yeah, and only time will tell. I'm very eager to see how this all pans out. So, Nick, I will let you go enjoy the rest of your evening with your family. I absolutely appreciate you joining me here for another great edition of the Coach's Corner podcast. I'll send you the link to this as soon as we upload it. Great conversation as always. Nick, thank you for joining me. You're a tremendous guest on here. You're a very pivotal piece of this show, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to speak to myself and many of the viewers who listen at home waiting to hear what you have to say.
No problem. Anytime. And don't forget, you can find me on Twitter at NickFerguson _25. I will be watching college football tomorrow, and I will be watching the game. So feel free to shoot me a tweet, and let's discuss these games.
Yeah, and you heard it there. Follow Nick Ferguson on Twitter at NickFerguson _25. He engages a lot in great conversation with a lot of us fans and provides a different insight to the game that some of us may not understand. So, Nick, thank you so much, and I want to wish you and your family a very happy New Year.
Same to you, and make sure that you have a very safe New Year at the same time.
Always. Thank you. I will be watching college football as well, seeing who wins between Alabama and Michigan State. That way we can talk to RJP3 and see if his Roll Tide is really up there for the challenge. So it's going to be I'm excited for it, and I absolutely look forward to talking about it with you tomorrow.
All right. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Have a blessed one.
All right. You do the same.
All right, the following episode is available for download right now on CodyRourke18.com. In the right-hand corner of the Coach's Corner podcast section, click on the link, and it'll take you to past and present episodes of the Coach's Corner podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodyRourke18 and at Coach's Co Podcast. Tweet us, send us anything that you want, and we may be on the show.